So my name is Catherine, and I've already been sufficiently introduced. So I will just go on to introducing my project and what I've learned through this fellowship year in 2023. So when I applied for the fellowship, I submitted this project idea. I didn't know a lot really about the intersection on digital rights and climate. So, as you've had, I had a really strong background in digital rights and digital policy, particularly in Africa, but I knew maybe zero to nothing around this intersection, and I was really curious to learn. And I wanted to use this fellowship as a way in which I could learn about a lot of things in this intersection. So I decided to use my strength, which was like research and things like this, to research on like the safety of climate activists in Africa and in sub-Saharan Africa. And then I realized, okay, so let me just follow this presentation before I digress. So why did this really matter to me? The first was because I thought that I've never really encountered this subject in like all my years of work. And so I knew for a fact there were very few resources around this. And then because I had been a program officer at Article 19, I knew that none of my like programming activities directly looked at climate activists or how they were engaging with like the digital environment or things like this. And I started to wonder how secure they might be, or if they're facing any digital challenges or something like this. And then the third was I knew that as a program officer at Article 19 who were supporting the digital portfolio, I often had a lot of knowledge around digital rights and would support a lot of my colleagues who are working on different aspects of activism, like civic space or something like this. So I knew for a fact that the digital rights community has a lot of knowledge, but the problem is they don't get to disseminate this to communities that actually need this knowledge. So, for example, on digital security or something like this, which was really my biggest and major concern. So, what did I want to do with my project? I really wanted to first find out what are the challenges for digital safety and security. And then I knew that already there were a lot of existing material on the internet around digital safety and security. So, I didn't want to reproduce it. However, I wanted to sort of put like lists together that would be very useful to people who are just like coming through or reading through this through this material. And then the next was I wanted to have like a workshop where I would bring together members of the digital rights community and climate community to sort of just discuss, get them like sharing on this issue. My idea was this would be like a starting point, and then beyond this, they would get to like know each other, network, and then like start to build synergies between these two aspects. And then the last was there I know there were a lot of like convenings on digital rights across the continent, and I thought this would be a good platform like Africa Internet Governance Forum or FIFA or Paradigms like conference in March. So I knew that there were really good opportunities to showcase this work, and I wanted to use these platforms to disseminate this report, but also get this idea of like digital rights and climate started. So this was my original idea and my thinking behind it, right? But then when I started the project, or when I started the fellowship, a lot of things changed for me, and I learned a lot throughout this 1 year and throughout this process that I then, and as I began to redefine my idea, I thought more about what I wanted to achieve with this project and which community I really wanted to reach, right? So, because I knew that I had a stronger access to the digital rights community, I began to wonder how my knowledge and how everything I had learned over the past year would be disseminated to them, but still maintaining my original like idea. So it was more of that I had more ideas, but I wanted to have a cohesive approach to how I present them. So I went around this, and I then now came up with a report outline, because as I was doing my research, I came to find out very different type of personalities or personas of who a climate activist might be. So I think my original idea was just your ordinary, like I think I didn't even know what I thought a climate activist does. But as I did this research, I began to more or less understand or look at life from the lens of a climate activist. And I encountered different personas of who this might be. And it could be like a community grassroots defender, it could be someone who comes from an indigenous community who's protecting their home or heritage, or it could actually be, and something that I really learned I did not know at all, was somebody who is pushing back against or effects of very big development projects, right? And it could also be like somebody who is pushing back against corporations or against the environmental effects of, for example, mining and things like this. So, for example, I came across the story of like a Chinese mine in DRC around extraction of cobalt and other things that are used for making digital devices. And then the second was a person or a climate activist who was complaining or who submitted a complaint to the World Bank complaint mechanism, which about a project that was being done by the World Bank in Uganda, and how this project would have a lot of significant impact for them and for this community, and then try and look at it through the lens of this person who would be fighting this mega project and all the risks that they would be facing, right? And then another would be just like at least something that I learned, like the gathering of climate activists during COVID, and just because of this pushback of mega projects having their, for example, meetings infiltrated or something like this. So it was really an eye-opening experience for me. So, what did I learn across the fellowship? Was first, I learned that not only, so before getting to the security and safety of this activist, I also learned that like this activists, they rely sometimes on digital tools for documentation of like violations, or even for advocacy, publishing research and things like this. These are really like important tools for them. And it's not only that these tools put them at risk, but these tools also support their work. If they want to like have petitions or something like this, the tools also support their work. Then the second thing I learned was the safety risks were more or less common and similar. So it was maybe exposure to surveillance that was a concern for them, or harassment, or being charged with criminal offenses. And this I thought was particularly interesting because some offenses like incitement to violence are also there in existing legislation that governs like digital environments. So I thought that if it happens and if they're convicted on such like offenses offline, then they would also be convicted of such offenses online and something like this. So I thought it was a really interesting finding and experience. And then the third thing I learned was so now this is actually like what I learned over the fellowship project, which was different ways in which digital rights and like climate intersects with digital rights. So I like through this fellowship learned more about like the internet infrastructure and how that is supports or supports actually like climate change or contributes to climate change, and what we might do around that. I also got to understand a lot about greenwashing, climate misinformation, and disinformation, which I thought was really interesting. And I before at Article 19, I helped found this create this national coalition in Kenya, and we were looking at issues of content moderation and free expression, but never did it once cross any of our minds that we maybe might look at this at the intersection of climate change. And so for me, these were really interesting new areas to learn, including like for example energy use, water use, like a lot of, and also like how to include communities when planning or when setting up certain infrastructures, how to also protect digital infrastructure from climate risks, like for example how to protect data centers from climate risks as well. These are like a lot of things that I learned through the project. And so I tried now finally to sort of marry all these things together, and I created a nice report outline that now looks like if you were a digital activist reading this report, you would first get to understand different personas of like climate activists, so just introducing you to like look at it from the lens of this climate activist, understand what are some of the challenges of safety and security for this activists, and then like just have a list of resources for them. But then the additional part of what I added was, if you like, some recommendations targeted towards the digital rights community, and also a bit of more resources on how this section intersects, and just a list of more things they would refer to if they're curious to know like about certain intersections that then now like promote this discussion. So I think that this way, if I am now going into my, I think this is what I just explained, sorry. So I think this way then it really presents everything I was able to learn. And up next, I know there's a slide about what is coming up next. So what's left for me is on 25th of October, I intend to host a workshop with like digital rights community and a few climate activists. So I intend to present this in a way that gets them interested, and also just creates this discussion on the bigger intersection between digital rights and climate. So I think the change, really like what has changed for me on a personal level, um, so I began to get more interested around this intersection, and then I began to like, just even within my own work, like as an advisor at JZ, volunteer more in contributing towards this intersection of digital policies, regulation, and climate change. And so it's reflected a lot in my work. At JZ, I joined the working group on green transition, which is really like a working group looking at how to promote digital green transitions, really. And then I also volunteered like to like attend COP28, which was a really good, I think I've never done this before, so like this was my level of interest. And then towards my community, I helped my community of digital rights activists and like climate activists organize a joint session at MozFest in Kenya. So this was a really good, I think, a really good start for the community, because I feel like also around this space, this is a very like, this is a topic that's really at a very elemental level. And I remember I met one of the coordinators from Mozilla, and she also had more or less the same idea. And then I've also had a lot of people reach out to me and tell me their intent to apply for the fellowship. So I think that that's been a really good way to reach out to my community. And as well, I was invited by the coalition that I helped form to present this idea around tackling climate misinformation in their next meetup in Mombasa in November. So I think this also really presents a good idea of how to reach out to different communities, because these are people who actually do this type of research and just to like bring this to their attention. So I think that is I think I move ahead before my slides, but like so what is coming up next is for me to complete my write up, my interviews, and then my workshop that's coming up on 25th of October, and then just to use the spaces that I'm already in to disseminate this work and to create like more interest and more advocacy around this topic.